On today's show, we'll be joined by weekly co-host Ben DuBose to discuss some of our takeaways from the past two Rockets games against the Miami Heat, as well as the Portland Trailblazers. They were both L's, but some very encouraging signs in both of these games. We'll talk about the Rockets' renewed ability to play defense, especially down the stretch of games. How can they apply that same level of defensive pressure over the course of a game, over the course of 48 minutes? Plus, TyTy Washington versus Daishen Nix, the point guard battle has been rekindled, if you will, with TyTy Washington making his true NBA debut, getting real NBA minutes, not just garbage time at the end of games. How has TyTy looked? Who should get the starting, or who should get the nod in the rotation moving forward? And how are the Rockets going to balance 12, 13-man rotations moving forward this season? We're going to discuss all that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can help the show out tremendously by commenting anything below. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. That's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. Joining us now is your weekly co-host, none other than the podfather himself, Rockets Wire editor and host of the Logger Line, Ben DuBose. You can follow on Twitter at Ben DuBose. Now, Ben, over these past couple Rockets games that we've seen now against the Miami Heat and the Portland Trailblazers, there were, I feel like some positives to be taken away from both of these games. Even though both games resulted in losses, I feel like there were some things that can be taken and built upon, as well as there were some, not so great trends. And we'll probably dive into a little bit of takeaways from both sides of the fence here in just a moment. But the first thing that I want to focus on is I really feel like this Rockets team is forming a bit of a defensive identity, and they have this ability to tap into like another gear defensively, especially in the clutch. We've seen this time and time again at the end of games. This group really is learning how to dial in when the going gets tough at the very end of the game. But they're just not able to kind of have that same impact defensively over the rest of the game. They're the number 2 team in the NBA in clutch defense this season, which is kind of absurd to think about, but then to not see it kind of translate to the rest of the game.
I also thought the first half Saturday was fairly encouraging because they were 1 of 17 on threes, and yet they were right there. And that speaks to how hard they were playing, that you can shoot that poorly from 3. I think they were 1 of 17 and Portland was 5 of 17, basically like a 12-point gap on threes on identical volume. And yet the Rockets were right there within 5 points most of the half, actually took a brief lead in the second quarter. That speaks to how hard they were playing. And it just is one of those situations where as you get into the second half, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either A, you're finally going to make some threes and things even out, or B, the dam is eventually going to break. And it was the latter that happened against Portland. At some point, if you aren't getting those threes, it's hard to make it 48 minutes without having it take a toll on your effort in other phases. And I think that's what happened against the Trailblazers. Eventually, they regressed into some bad habits when those shots didn't fall. But I think the fact they played 24 minutes and really kept it going and played with that level of intensity speaks to it's at least a positive that you can build on, that they didn't get discouraged. They stuck with it. And quite frankly, we're right there against a team that had far better shooting luck. I think that speaks to a pretty good process. And the same can be said with the Heat game. As you mentioned, the final 5 minutes, holding them literally scoreless as you mounted that comeback, 9-0 to finish the game. And who knows, you'd get a bit better officiating luck. 2 of the 3 blown calls in the final minute and 18 seconds when against the Rockets, maybe you somehow win that game as well. And that would have been your 6th straight at home. So I understand 2 straight home losses. It's tough. But yeah, it's one of those situations where it's not as if it's like the San Antonio game from earlier this month where the overall effort was just terrible and there's nothing positive that you can draw on. No, I think especially at the culture level, there's some things that are clearly going right. Now, individually, we can talk about Jalen Green shooting just 23% on threes over his last 15 games. We can talk about Kevin Porter Jr. and the turnovers. We've done that ad nauseum the last few weeks. You can certainly poke holes in the individual performances of certain players up and down the roster, but collectively, the unit, it does feel like they're in a healthier place now than maybe they were a month or so ago. And so I think that's something that even if some of the individual performances are a bit lacking, at least in terms of the cohesion, the structure of the group as a whole, I do think there's something there, and the defensive performances and how hard they're playing are evidence of that.
I think Steven Silas said something interesting, when I was asking him about, what you can take away after the Heat game, that is, what you can take away from these types of, defensive performances and kind of what he's seeing and how it's translating out on the court. And he said the guys are playing defense with confidence, right? Where, you've got so many young guys who are trying to learn NBA offensive schemes, who are trying to understand where they need to be on the floor, how to guard against certain guys, how to do simple things like how to close out effectively, how to navigate pick and rolls, all these little things. And you're starting to see some of those lessons really sink into a point where these guys not only know what they're supposed to be doing defensively now, but they also have the confidence to rotate quickly, be in the right spots, close off driving lanes, be the help defender to cut off a drive, or be that quick guy who, comes over for a quick flash double team or something to force the ball out of a star player's hands. And you're seeing them kind of execute these things a little bit quicker. I think when you look at like the draft class from the Rockets last year, right? Jalen, Alp, Josh, those guys, probably took a little bit longer to grasp some of the defensive concepts and lessons, whereas guys like Jabari and Tari are a little bit more equipped for, immediate impact on that side of the ball this season. But you're starting to see all of that kind of mesh and coalesce together now.
Absolutely. And it's worth noting they don't have Jae'Sean Tate, who was viewed by most people going into this season as the most ready-made defender. I think Jabari Smith Jr. might have the most tools, but he's just 19 years old. In terms of having an NBA body and the experience of playing at this level and the rotations and everything that comes with that and trying to read other NBA offenses, Tate's probably your best guy. And honestly, he has been out there for almost nothing this entire season. You do have Eric Gordon, but I think we can agree that Eric Gordon has been fairly underwhelming on the defensive end. Doesn't feel like he's really dialed in with this particular team and the rebuild this year, which we've talked about in the past. So really, it feels like your young guys are driving this. And I think that's really encouraging. And with that said, I do think that there's some small sample size theater to it. The actual number of clutch possessions is not that high. So are they really a top 5 defense when they sort of commit to it? Probably not. I know statistically they are, but I think some of it's probably just some good fortune and teams in a small sample missing shots they might make over a larger sample. But where it does matter is that it gives them confidence, even if it's not fully accurate or representative of where they are defensively or the pieces that they have. It does feed into this mindset that, hey, when we really commit ourselves, we can be good. Maybe top 5, top 2 is a little extreme, but it does feed the idea that when we buy in, we can see better results. And so even if that's a little bit inflated, I just want to push back on the narrative that I'm sure some are listening to this and saying, well, is this really true? Even if it's not, even if it's slightly exaggerated, there's still a ton of positives that a young team can basically draw from that, from this idea that when they turn up their intensity, they can be a functional or more than functional, in this case, defense. And that's exactly what Steven Silas and the coaching staff has been trying to do for well over a year now with this group.
Coming up, we finally got to see TyTy Washington play some relevant NBA minutes over these past couple games. So now that kind of rekindles the flame between the TyTy Washington versus Daishen Nix debate. Yes, I am sorry, Zach Lowe. We are going to be talking about Daishen Nix next segment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Next game, I'm taking Jalen Green to score more than 26.5 points. How about Jabari Smith Jr. to have more than 7.5 rebounds? What about Kevin Porter Jr. to have more than 6.5 assists? Or how about off the bench, we'll take Garrison Matthews when he gets back to the lineup to have more than 2.5 3-pointers made. So how does Prize Picks work, right? It's so simple. You pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 25 times back on your money on any entry that you submit. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch. This includes NBA, NFL, NHL, PGA, you name it, they've got it over at PrizePicks. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. They offer safe and fast withdrawals, currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Ben, it feels like, we've been waiting all season to see TyTy Washington in action. He got sent down to the RGV Vipers and was doing a lot of great work with them. It was reps that he I don't want to say desperately needed, but reps to, keep him fresh, right, to let him, hone his craft, practice his game, all of that, and be ready for when the Rockets ultimately called on him. And they did that against the Miami Heat. Everybody got really excited because we thought that he was just ahead of Daishen Nix in the rotation all of a sudden, out of nowhere seemingly. And we find out after the game that Daishen Nix was sick that game. So TyTy Washington did not, truly beat out Daishen Nix in the rotation for that spot, at least Thursday night. But then Saturday night, we still saw TyTy Washington be called, have his number called ahead of Daishen Nix. That first game by TyTy, 5 assists, 0 turnovers in his 12 minutes of run against the Miami Heat. Watching an actual point guard out there running the Rockets offense, a point guard who isn't, look, Daishen Nix can handle. He makes some good reads occasionally, but he's just, to me, he's way too passive with the ball. We're going to get into this back and forth debate. Give me your immediate read on TyTy Washington, his impact, from what you saw, out of him on the floor.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. 5 assists to 0 turnovers in 12 minutes doesn't lie. And I think the real big thing for TyTy is that he has a weapon in that floater that allows him to finish, because that's so critical when we talk about the point guard role. The issue with Daishen Nix, even though he shot the threes for most of this year at a respectable level, upper 30s, he actually was in the mid to upper 30s from 2-point range, which speaks to the fact that he just doesn't pressure defenses either when it comes to explosion right at the rim, or even if you're not super athletic, okay, if you have the touch, if you have a floater, something that you can get to in the mid-range, even a pull-up, something that makes defenders worry about you when you're trying to probe, then that can open up so many other elements of the offense. It can open up the drive and kick game to some of your shooters. But the issue with Daishen Nix is just that defenses don't and didn't respect his ability to finish at the rim or really anywhere else on his drives. So it was just sort of dribbling for the sake of dribbling. It wasn't really generating looks. And when that's your approach, even if you are fairly smart and a good passer, at the same time, if you're not tilting the floor to your advantage, then what does it really do? It just ends up being him sort of dribbling a lot, a dribble fest, if you will. Whereas with TyTy, because he can finish, that's in there in the scouting report, it's a little bit easier for him to either hit a shooter or a cutter. We saw that with the Tari Eason play that actually gave them the lead in the fourth quarter against Miami, which was, in my opinion,
such a great pass.
Yeah. And I just thought it's not going to be that easy every game. I think especially in game one, maybe TyTy benefited from there being zero scouting report on him at all. But I just think in general, his game profile's a bit friendlier than Daishen Nix, because the issue with Nix, again, if you don't really have the athleticism to finish, you don't really have the mid-range game. And even though I know his 3-point shot, his numbers for the season are pretty good, he doesn't profile historically as an elite shooter. I think over time that would sort of even out a little bit. Then it's tough for me to see what the sustainable model is for him I guess, threatening defense is enough for his gifts as a passer and as someone that can read the floor to really matter, because he's just not going to attract that level of attention, what he needs to, from the opposing defense. So I just think long-term, the talent base with TyTy is better. There's a reason why he was a first-round pick and Daishen Nix went undrafted. And so to me, TyTy is the more interesting prospect, and he got some seasoning in the G League, and I would like to see him more. And on Saturday, it was interesting because both of those guys played. Now, perhaps some of it is because Garrison Matthews has been dealing with a non-COVID illness. So that's one short in the rotation, although I don't know why you have to necessarily have a 10 or 11-man rotation in the first place. That's a completely different discussion that we could have. But I just think sometimes it reminds me a little bit of what we've seen at the center spot, which is ever since Bruno Fernando came back, the Rockets are trying to somehow fit in 3 centers only between Alperen, Sengun, Usman Garuba, and Bruno Fernando. And now I'm worried that they're starting to do, this has only happened one game, but are they going to try and do the same thing at point guard, because they don't want to tell one of these guys that they're out of the rotation? And, we shouldn't pile all of this on Stephen Silas. Who knows? Maybe he's being told that some guys need to play, and they do want to get evaluations, talking about the Rockets in this case, of all of these players. But it's just really hard if you're trying to play 3 players that are basically, point guards only or centers only. I mean, I guess you could consider Kevin Porter Jr. a wing in some of these lineups. But even so, it just feels like sort of forcing a square peg into a round hole when you're trying to just get, 4 or 5 minute bursts to say, oh, we didn't bench Daishen Nix. We got some Daishen Nix minutes here. Or look, we got Bruno Fernando some minutes here. He's not out of the rotation. Sometimes you need to make hard calls. And again, I don't want to pile on Stephen Silas. We don't know for sure that it's on him, but I just struggle to see what the point is of some of these cameos, is what it feels like to me. Saturday with Nix, and then, at times recently with Bruno. If you've got 2 guys that you trust in Kevin Porter Jr. and TyTy Washington, or at center with Alperen Sengun and Usman Garuba, you can fill your 48 minutes that way. And the other thing that I would point out with TyTy, I do think that it shows you how much your offense can benefit from just having a normal point guard. We talked about Daishen Nix's limitations. We've talked about Kevin Porter Jr.'s limitations throughout the season. And sometimes it feels like that there's sort of this dichotomy. A lot of people, the way it's phrased on social media, it's got to be either, the Chris Paul model point guard from a few years ago or Kevin Porter Jr., and there's nothing in between. In reality, there's lots of different shades of gray. And even if TyTy Washington isn't an elite point guard, he's not even close at this point. Again, there are other areas of your offense that you can unlock with a bit more of a traditional approach. It's not black or white. There's lots of shades of gray in this. And so to me, those are the 2 takeaways when I look at, playing TyTy Washington and what they need to consider. Number one, I don't really understand some of the cameos they've been doing. And secondly, it reminds you, again, that there is some nuance. Even if TyTy Washington isn't, just the quintessential Mark Jackson style point guard from the old school NBA, he's not there yet. No, but at the same time, there are some benefits. Even with a guy who's a rookie in year 2, you could see him, or in month 2, excuse me, you can see him unlocking things that Kevin Porter Jr. in year 4 still isn't doing. And again, that's not all his fault. We understand the limitations, but at the same time, the Rockets should be excited by what they've seen. And I would be disappointed if he's not in the rotation Monday night against the Spurs and moving forward, at least for the next few games.
I think there's one more strength about TyTy Washington's games that I want to highlight, as well as a relative weakness in comparison to Daishen Nix that I want to talk about in a second, as well as kind of circling back and kind of picking apart a little bit more. You brought up that great point, right, about trying to squeeze so many pieces into this lineup, into this rotation.
The 12-man rotation.
Possibly a 13-man rotation when Jae'Sean Tate comes back. I want to talk about that a little bit more as well. We're going to get there in just one moment, but first, today's episode is brought to you by ExpressVPN. ExpressVPN protects your privacy and security online, but here's something you might not know. You can also use ExpressVPN to unlock movies and shows that are only available in other countries. Maybe you've run out of stuff to finally watch on Netflix. This will completely change your world. ExpressVPN allows you to binge watch, for example, The Office UK edition. It's so simple to do. Just sign into Netflix, fire up ExpressVPN app, and change your location to the UK, refresh Netflix, and that's it. ExpressVPN lets you control where you want sites to think that you're located. You You can choose from almost 100 different countries, so just imagine all the different Netflix libraries that you can finally get your hands on. ExpressVPN is the best way to watch shows because it's ridiculously fast, there's never any buffering or lag, and you can stream in HD no problem. So if you want to get access to hundreds of new shows, go to expressvpn.com/lockedon right now, and you can get an extra 3 months of ExpressVPN for free. That's expressvpn.com/lockedon, expressvpn.com/lockedon to learn more. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, been a couple of the things that I kind of, had noticed about TyTy Washington's game, and I'll start with the negative first, because I think it's a pretty fair observation at this point, is I think Daishen Nix does have him beat defensively. I think that's one thing to consider. Daishen Nix, he's got a bit more size defensively, right? He can throw his body around a bit more, and I do think just his awareness on the defensive side, he kind of understands, where to be, how to guard certain guys, whatever. At this point, that's not to say that TyTy can't grow and develop into a good defender, but I think Daishen has the edge over him on that side of the floor just right now. Although TyTy is incredibly crafty, we saw this on display during Summer League. He's able to play passing lanes, active hands, that kind of thing. But as far as just straight up man-to-man bodying up to another defender, Daishen has the points in that regard. And the other thing that really stood out was TyTy's ability and willingness to move without the basketball, right? You talk about the shades of gray as far as point guard is concerned. And not only was TyTy impressive in the aspect of, his ability to actually handle and orchestrate the offense and set up his teammates, but also there were moments, right? And we've seen this all throughout the season, right? Where a play kind of breaks down and maybe like the ball gets picked up somewhere, and then we kind of sit here and we're like pulling our hair out of our heads because like Alp picked up the ball in the post and like nobody's moving, nobody's cutting, nobody's trying to get to the basketball, and he's stuck there for 5-8 seconds, whatever, while the clock is dwindling down. There were a couple different possessions where TyTy would move without the basketball. There was one where he got all the way into the corner, and I believe he kind of rescued KJ Martin, who had picked up his dribble, and he got into the corner and then attempted a three-pointer from that corner where KJ was able to just kind of pitch him the ball, and TyTy was able to get the shot up. And then he had another one where he flashed into the paint and was able to get a floater attempt. And I think that pass was delivered by Usman Garuba, if I'm not mistaken, off of an offensive rebound. So it's those little moments where TyTy is just, basketball, his basketball awareness, is so good that he understands, okay, I can flash here, I can cut here, I can move here and create a shot either for myself or get the defense in rotation without even having to touch the basketball and just get a pass delivered to me. And I think that is really encouraging as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Your point on defense is well taken, but some of that honestly is just year 2 versus year 1. I mean, the body plays into it, but a guy who's not even played 2 months at the professional level, of course, he's going to be behind a guy who's been doing this for a year and has been in the system and is more knowledgeable of the schemes. Honestly, if that's the gap, I think some of it is going to be bridged simply just through TyTy getting more reps and more
playing
experience.
Time,
and the other thing too is that when it comes to, I suppose, this whole idea of structure, I tend to focus a bit more on offense because defensively, honestly, a lot of the adjustment is simply playing harder. Not to say that there's not talent when it comes to defending. Certainly there is, but some of it is simply just buying into the team concept, communicating, being aware of your responsibilities, being in sync with your teammates, making the right reads and rotations, and just basically being dialed in mentally
and just hustling. If you want it more defensively than the other guy, you're oftentimes going to get the benefit of the doubt.
Yes. I mean, I know he hasn't played the last couple of games because he's been out ill, but Garrison Matthews is a good example. I don't think Garrison Matthews is a big tools guy defensively, but I think simply through the hustle, he makes a clear positive impact on defense in a lot of games. And I think that's something that, it doesn't overcome the talent and athleticism deficiencies, but it can at least bridge it to an extent. And so when I look at structure, I focus much more on offense because that's where, again, not that hustle means nothing. We've certainly seen Tari Eason make basically his rookie season to this point is largely offensively out of hustle. But for the most part, it's much more about how you play as a collective unit, especially at the point guard position. So that's why I tend to be much more focused on offense in these evaluations. Your points on defense are well taken, but when we focus on, are the Rockets getting where they need to go, not just individually, but as a unit, those strides we want to see, I think offensively, that's much more where a a traditional point guard. Not that I want to pigeonhole TyTy into that, because, he can, he's got some wiggle to his game. He can create.
He's got some combo guard to him a little bit.
Yeah. But something that's more traditional than Kevin Porter Jr., something that's, going back to those shades of gray, you want to see what that means, not just for the player, but for the team as a whole, and what that means for how organized you are. To me, it's been a very small sample, but I'm intrigued by what we've seen. And so that's sort of the structure that I'm looking at a bit more, because defensively, there's certainly some tools that go into it, but I think some of that is just going to be, do they buy in? Do they try hard? And hopefully we talked about that in the first couple of segments, simply seeing those results at the end of games, even if it's a little bit fluky, look, that's something they can point to and say, look, when we're dialed in, these are the results. This is what we believe we can do. And so I think some of that will just be solved simply through effort. Whereas offense, it takes certain types of players. It takes certain types of reads, even if you're fully dialed in, because I don't think anybody would say Kevin Porter Jr. isn't trying. No, he's absolutely locked in. It's just he has certain limitations in terms of his skill set. Whereas with TyTy, it allows you to do some different things. And so how does that make you functionally look as a team? Does it potentially unlock different elements of Jalen Green's game, for example, or Jabari Smith Jr., these top prospects that you're trying to develop? That's what you want to see from this team. And so, again, I don't want to make a mountain out of a molehill, because we've basically seen TyTy in the rotation for 2 games for like 10, 12 minutes with other rotation players, because a lot of Saturday was garbage time in the fourth quarter. But there's just some little things that I've seen that we definitely need to see more data on. That's the best way I would put it. There's been enough intrigue there for me to sort of, raise my eyebrow and say, that's interesting. Let's see what happens if we keep this going. And what does that mean for not just TyTy, but the players he's playing with?
I'm making a mountain out of it, Ben, because at the end of that first quarter against the Blazers, we saw a lineup that was TyTy Washington, Jalen Green, KJ Martin, Jabari Smith Jr., and Usman Garuba. And I have never been happier to see a 5-man lineup on the floor this entire season. That lineup brought me an immense amount of joy. I can't even remember truly if that lineup actually played well together on the floor, but just having those 5 names together on the floor, it's like, man, these are some of the names that we want to see getting like the majority and the bulk of minutes, and seeing these guys all play together and watching like Jalen and Jabari play an entire first quarter together. Like, I don't know. It was.
Yeah, and I would also say that I think TyTy is potentially a good fit for Usman Garuba as well, simply from the standpoint of when you had Daishen and Garuba out there, and that often happened because
2 zeros on offense trying to do a pick and roll together
at all. Yeah, when that's 2 of your 5, of course it's going to get dicey no matter who the other 3 are. As opposed to TyTy, again, there's just more elements to his game than there is with Daishen. And I don't want to put the expectation super high on a guy who's not even 2 months into his NBA career, at least in terms of the regular season. But look, there's just more you can unlock there. There's more talent, as opposed to when it's Nix and Garuba. Of course it's going to be ugly, because that's 2 of your 5 players on offense that can't really create their own offense and put zero fear into the opposing defense. So of course it's going to be ugly. Whereas TyTy, there's at least more upside.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Could not agree more there. This whole idea of this rotation, Ben, Steven did mention, after the game against the Blazers, that part of the reasoning for the lineup that featured Daishen Nix, Eric Gordon, and Kevin Porter Jr. out there all together played into the fact that Garrison Matthews was unavailable for that game, and he said he wanted a bit more size on the floor, which kind of allowed him to play Kevin a couple positions up compared to where he normally plays, obviously. Right. So. But it was curious to see them roll out Kevin, and even though offensively he was still very much, I think, kind of the one. He was still kind of orchestrating a lot when Daishen was still on the floor. There were moments where Daishen would bring the ball up, but for the most part, it was, all right, Daishen, bring the ball up and go get the hell out of the way so that KPJ can do his thing. But I do wonder, right? That makes you wonder what they're going to do moving forward, because now you very clearly have TyTy Washington and Daishen Nix. You're trying to run 3 centers. Which I do appreciate, at least the fact that they're not, I guess, they're still prioritizing Sengun. They're still, he's still the starter for now, at least, although given what we know and how the early season looked, I mean, at the drop of a hat, they could switch up on us and throw Bruno Fernando back in the starting lineup. Who knows? But I just don't see how they're going to be able to balance all these different names together. And it does make you think, right? Is it because they don't want to have these hard conversations with guys, right? We went through the whole thing last season with Daniel Tice, starting well past when the eye test told us that the starting lineup was horrendous, right? And that something had to change. We've got the Eric Gordon situation going on right now where, why is Eric starting at the 3, right? Like he's playing out of position. He's undersized. He doesn't look mentally dialed in like some of these other younger guys do. And it does really make you wonder, is this a comfortability thing for Coach Silas? Is it an organizational thing where there's certain guys that they want, to get certain minutes? I'm really torn on it at this point.
Yeah. The best explanation I can come up with is just organizationally, and this being a rebuilding season, they want to evaluate some of these guys. That's the only way that I can make sense of some of this, because I can't imagine that,
gotta evaluate Eric Gordon in a developmental season, man. It's crucial.
Or make him more trade friendly, perhaps. Keep him happy.
Maybe showcase for Eric.
Yeah.
Better word.
But what I'm really focused on is some of these like 4 or 5 minute cameo stretches where Bruno comes in, and it feels like just to say that you're playing, that you haven't kicked him from the rotation, or Daishen Nix the other night. Now, who knows if that continues to happen, because I know Garrison Matthews was out with an illness.
I apologize, Ben. I almost don't necessarily mind it for Bruno, if only because, right, his skill set is kind of like he's one-dimensionally limited in the fact that he's
lob threat.
Like that's what he's there to do. And so like I kind of don't mind it if they're able to structure it to where it's like, okay, well, here's the Bruno minutes, and he's paired exclusively with Kevin for the Bruno minutes, right? Which is what he did against the Blazers. So
wouldn't you rather give Usman Garuba if he's playing well? And I think generally he has. I thought the first half against Portland, that's a good example. That's the most recent game as we're recording this. I thought Garuba in the first quarter of that game, now he did pick up a couple of fouls, but I thought he was really, really good. Super impactful. The energy was all over the place. He's year 2. I get what you're saying with Bruno. In a vacuum, you can say that, well, him as a lob threat in certain configurations makes sense. But at the end of the day, why wouldn't you rather just give those minutes to Garuba, a guy who's clearly a better prospect and in year 2, and this is developmental season? I just don't understand what some of these brief cameos really do in terms of the evaluations. And so that's what's so frustrating, is that even if you think that you can use these for evaluating purposes, keeping morale high or whatever it may be, then at the end of the day, does yanking players in and out, and basically a sample being that small, does that really give you the type of data that you need anyway? Because they're not getting comfortable. You're not giving them extended run. With Garuba, of course, one of the big questions is durability. I personally like to see, okay, if we get his minutes up to 2025, can he stay healthy? Does he scale up? How much of this energy that we see him provide in small doses, how much of that is going to be scalable as he plays more minutes, and perhaps against starting quality players is more? Like, he's just a higher tier than Bruno when it comes to players that you're trying to evaluate. Yeah. So to me, this is the season for that. And some of this may clear itself up anyway as we get closer to the February trade deadline, because we've talked about it for months. It feels like the Rockets are primed for a consolidation move. And, maybe they deal Eric Gordon. Maybe there's some sort of 2-for-1, 3-for-1 type trade, because, there's going to be so many situations around the league that come to a head with teams potentially wanting to pivot into a mini tank, if you will, given Wemby and Scoot. And so we've seen some talk on NBA Twitter in recent days about like Chicago and Toronto out east, and there may be some in the West as well, teams that try and pivot to a 1 or 2 year rebuild to maximize their lottery odds. Maybe there's an opportunity that the Rockets want to jump on. And so maybe you clear up some of this that way as well. But in the short term, that's more intermediate term, probably, closer to February. And I think if you're the Rockets, you probably don't want to do that close to February anyway, because if you do it now, you're going to impact your own lottery odds, as opposed to you make a bigger move. Even if you bring in a better player, well, if it's in February, only 25% of the season's left. So it's probably not going to mean all that much to your wins and losses, at the end of the day. But, again, that's sort of intermediate term. In the short term, assuming there's no big trade, I just think that, it doesn't seem like there's anything really cooking with the Rockets and around the league. It feels like most teams want to sort of bide their time, see what's out there, make sure they're getting the best possible offer, which means waiting in many cases until there's deadline pressure to make sure that every team is, coming to the table with their best offer. Then, I'm just skeptical about these cameos and whether it gives you the best chance to evaluate your current roster. I mean, I get the idea in theory, but in this case, just to use sort of the center position and point guard as examples, I just don't know that the 4 to 5 minutes that you give in a half to Bruno or Daishen Nix is really worth it if it's coming at the expense of guys like Usman Garuba and TyTy Washington, who are clearly in a higher tier of prospects. No, I don't really believe, or at least I'm choosing not to, because I want to be optimistic, that the Rockets view Daishen Nix as a lottery talent. I think, that was felt exaggerated from the moment that quote started making the rounds. I think maybe you can say that perhaps if everything clicks, there might be lottery upside. But in terms of the actual player, there's a reason why he was undrafted. There's a reason why TyTy Washington was scouted as a first-round pick, and people thought it was a really great value at 29. He's just, his floor scenarios are a lot higher. Lots of guys around the league could be a lottery talent if things really click. But
I could be a lottery talent if things had clicked for me, okay?
You're a lottery talent as a podcast host. Come on, Jackson. But like, you know what I mean? Like, evaluating the overall player is not just about these upside scenarios. And I'm not trying to take shots at Jonathan Fagan, who's an absolute legend. No, I think he's talking about the upside scenarios, but there's also these floor scenarios. And of course, with Daishen, a lot of it has to do with his body. Can he, when he came into the league, let's just be blunt, he was very overweight. And, now he's gotten his body into better shape, but he still doesn't seem to have quite the wiggle, the bounce, the explosion to really generate rim pressure. So can he, hit this upside scenario, which is built around, he does have the body to be impactful defensively, as you were saying, and he does read the floor well. It's just, can he, create enough offense, put enough pressure on the defense for this stuff to matter? And it takes a lot of dominoes lining up, as opposed to with TyTy, there's just a much higher floor. That's why he's a better prospect. There's also a reason why Usman Garuba was seen as perhaps the best defender in his entire class, a clear first rounder, whereas Bruno is a guy who's, been through 3 teams, a second round pick from 2019. Usman is just a higher tier of prospect. And so, in a vacuum, you can say, well, these guys may have a case, but at the same time, if, the lottery case, if you will, and I'm using lottery in a different way here, like a lottery ticket for a guy like Daishen or Bruno, is that really worth it if it's cutting into your sample, your evaluation for guys that are more legit prospects like Usman, like TyTy? To me, that's where I would say no. And that's where some of these decisions feel a bit frustrating, be it organizational, be it Steven Silas, whatever it may be. Some of it gets to be frustrating because I'd like to see a guy, especially Usman. I get with TyTy, he's a rookie, so I can sort of see some of the hesitation there. But Usman in year 2, yeah, I'd like to see. I've seen some really encouraging things lately. Let's scale those minutes up to 20, 25 minutes a game and see how many of these things hold, because it'd be great to have more of a sense of what he can do moving forward by the time you get to this offseason and you have all this cap space and all these other avenues that you can do with your roster.
It's so funny how much of that argument you can just copy paste into the argument for why is Eric Gordon still starting as well, right? Where you're just like, come on. But we've
yeah, I think there's some exceptions to that simply based on his veteran status and of course the showcasing.
Fair.
I agree with you that you can use many of the same, I guess, principles and apply them there. I would just give Gordon a bit of a pass based on his status around the league. That's fair. Whereas with guys that are in the same playing field, these young guys in year 1, year 2, that's where, to me, it gets especially frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. With that, then, it's this time of year. I delayed doing this pretty consistently, but now we're going to be doing this, quite a bit moving forward. We're going to run a quick lottery simulation before we wrap this thing up. This is always the fun the light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. The Rockets currently have the 4th best lottery odds behind Charlotte, Detroit, and San Antonio. So let's spin the wheel, see where they land. Okay, not the worst. Actually, kind of. Oh no, this is a terrible one.
No.
I mean, the Rockets landed 3rd, so disappointing. You miss out on Scoot and Wemby, but, they're still there, so maybe Amen Thompson, whatever. But San Antonio jumped up 1 spot to number 2. Do you want to take a stab at who jumped up 9 places to number 1?
Oh no! Don't tell me. Tell me it's the Lakers pick.
Oh yes, it's the Lakers
which
pick,
goes to the Pelicans.
Wembanyama's going to the Big Easy. I mean,
oh my God.
That's why I said it was a bad one. So that was pretty ugly.
Yeah, if they both go to the Southwest, yeah, that's pretty bad.
Oh man, Detroit fell a few spots down to number 4, and Charlotte fell 4 spots all the way down to number 5. So with that, a pretty lackluster, disappointing, if you will, lottery simulation, especially given the fact that you send Wemby to New Orleans and Scoot Henderson to San Antonio, and the Rockets don't get either of them, but they still both managed to land in the Southwest Division.
Although I will say the Spurs have done some pretty, unique stuff with their draft picks the last few years. Obviously, Josh Primo, even tossing aside the crazy personal circumstances of the last few months, that was a bizarre pick at the time. So if anyone could conceivably get like pick 2, I don't buy that pick 1, they're not going to pick Wemby. That would just be beyond insane. But if anybody could sort of galaxy brain themselves into not taking Scoot Henderson at 2, it might be the Spurs. So that's not the worst case scenario. If you want to say that maybe they go the Josh Primo route and somehow talk themselves into somebody that's not Scoot Henderson. Let's be optimistic.
There you go. I like the optimism. Ben, you know the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at.
Yep. The Rockets Wire on Twitter, the Logger Line on Twitter. That's where you can find my daily coverage for USA Today's Rockets blog. And of course, the podcast to do with Paolo Alves. And of course, you can follow me at Ben DuBose. Live reaction, for better or for worse, every Rockets game at Ben DuBose on Twitter. And then the website for Rockets Wire, of course, rocketswire.usatoday.com.
And that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast. That's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also available on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Who should get the backup point guard minutes moving forward? TyTy Washington or Daishen Nix? Let me know in the YouTube comments. I read each and every one of those every single day. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.